I live in a house that was built nearly 120 years ago by my great-great-great-grandfather. 5 generations have lived here before me, I being the 6th, and my son who was born here makes 7 generations. If my will and my luck prevails, more generations will follow. When I was a little boy, it was always lived in by my great-grandmother, who was always, up until just over 10 years ago, she was always the matriarch of the family. So all family things happened here that brought the extended family together. There's always been a lot of strong family energy here, which has made this place even more important, not just to me, I would think, but to the rest of my family as well. Now, it's been invaluable to me for my personal development and remembering who I am and remembering my roots and where I've come from. It's extremely valuable because the land is fertile. There's enough land and water here to feed several families, which I intend on doing. But unfortunately, I had to go into debt in order to own this place, to keep this place in my family. And I just want to talk about why that happened, how that happened, why it should never have happened, and what I'm willing to do in order to make sure nothing like that ever happens to this place again. The reason I had to go into debt in order to keep this place in my family was because of greed. Now, when my great-grandmother died, this place came to be in possession of her 3 children. My great-uncle, my grandmother, and my great-aunt. Now, a few years up until she died, and a year after she died, no one lived here. My great-grandmother, she lived with family. She became a little bit more frail and less independent in the last few years of her life. She was always quite strong up until probably age 96, 97, and she was lived out here by herself for over 40 years. Now, she always was a very welcoming person. Like I said, she was the matriarch of the family for decades and decades, so she was always used to having people come and visit and having this place be a center point for family things. Now, even when she wasn't living here, people always came and stayed, family came and stayed. It was never a real cost on the family, other than, say, some land taxes and maintenance. But after she died, 2 out of the 3 siblings wanted to sell the place, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Now, like I said, I could go on forever talking about why this place is so important to me, but just from what I've explained already, I'd like to think that it's pretty self-explanatory, that a person wouldn't want to just throw something like this away. I don't know anyone who's in a position like me, with or without the debt. I don't know anyone who's can say that they live in a house that they can trace back for 7 generations. So to want to throw that away, I think is absolutely retarded. Now, like I said, 2 out of the 3 siblings wanted to sell the place after my great-grandmother died. My uncle, the eldest, who was a farmer, he lives on a farm, which he owns, which has got 2 perfectly good homes on it. One which he has lived in for some years, and one that has been vacant for some years as well. Now, what he did with his share of the money that has come out of my pocket now is he used that to build an entirely new home on the same property. So he now has 3 houses on his property, and he's crying poor again. he didn't need the third house. The way I see it, it was just an expensive form of house cleaning. Rather than just clean up your old house, I'm going to build an entire new one and leave the other two to just not be a problem, which is extremely illogical. My great aunt, who was the youngest sibling, she used her share of the money to put her husband in a retirement home rather than look after her himself. And she's used the rest of her money to go on cruise ships and play pokey machines. And I often hear about her complaining about how she's got no money now. And this is all within 10 years of me buying the house off of them. They've already run out of their money. It wasn't a lot of money, but times 3, it's a lot of money for me to come up with, which is why I had to go into debt. Now, the middle sibling, which is my grandmother, she, in many ways, is a little bit more innocent than the other two, because she didn't want to sell the place. She lives on the other side of town, and she was the one responsible for maintaining the place just because she was the closest. She was happy to keep the house in the family and keep maintaining it so that the rest of the family could still use it and enjoy the value of the thing. She wasn't too happy about having to pay land taxes, being an elderly woman, unemployed, and all that sort of thing. But if ever it was an issue of cost, divided amongst the entire family, the land rates would cost next to nothing. For one person to pay the taxes on this place is not cheap, but for the entire family to fork out a little bit and just to keep this place alive, no one was going broke doing that, so it was never an excuse. But nonetheless, my grandmother, although I say she was more innocent, she's still far from innocent as far as greed goes. Now, what she did with her money, she's still got a lot of it, from what I understand, which is where she's a lot smarter and wiser than the other two. But what she used a good chunk of that money on, I don't necessarily agree with. Now, what she did with a lot of that money is she used it on radiotherapy to treat my late grandfather for cancer. A man in his late 80s at the time, was strung along for a little bit more quantity over quality, so to speak, only to die at 91 anyhow. A man who's had a good long life. A lot of money was spent just to string him along for a few more years. And I understand why she'd want to do that, the fear of loneliness and just trying to preserve life. I get that, but at some point we've got to realise we can't live forever, no matter what we pay. But the price that we pay might be higher than we're willing to part with. But yeah, that's where my money has gone, just in order to maintain a little bit of honour, or a lot of honour really, and keeping this ancestral property. Now, I didn't have the money to buy this place to begin with, so therefore I've had to go into debt. Debt was not something that I ever wanted to have in my life. My plan was always to work for a little bit, save up some money and buy a relatively cheap property and live off the grid, live the subsistent lifestyle. Ever since I was a little boy, I was always discouraged, of course, by teachers and family and whatnot, telling me it's a life that would be hard and I'd never make any money. But those arguments are really non-arguments, because I think those people are really missing the point. But that all changed when my great-grandmother died, because like I said, I wasn't letting this place be sold for some shekels. And I had to change my plans and make sacrifices for honour and integrity. the price I had to pay for this place and to keep this place was 2 or 3 times what I was prepared to pay in looking for my own. But as I said, once this happened, once I heard that they were trying to sell this place, I really had no option. I had no choice at the time, and I have no regrets either. I would have done some things differently if I could do it all over again, although I can't. But I have no regrets, and I'm ultimately glad that I did buy the place, because if it is half as valuable to my children as I hope it will be for me, it's invaluable. I've had to make a lot of sacrifices, and I've tried hard to get out of debt as quick as I can. Probably a little bit too hard. I've overworked myself, trying to just be debt-free as soon as possible so that I could live that life that I'd planned on living originally. But the sacrifice that I've really realized I've made is not working hard for debt, but the sacrifice I've come to accept is that I might not get to live that life like I'd ever planned. I still might later in my life, but my body might be shot, my back might be ruined before I'm able to do all that for myself, and hopefully my children love me enough to look after me in my old age. But the value in all this is what I can do is I can be an example to my children and teach them the value of this place and not the cost of it. I want to explain to my son that the reason I couldn't do a lot of things with him and my other sons, which haven't been born yet, hopefully, I want to explain to them that I could have spent more time with them and we could have done a lot more things together if generations before me weren't so greedy. I want them to understand that no amount of gold is worth more than what we have in this place, because we have roots that sink what I think is pretty deep. 6 generations here. There's a lot of memory, a lot of ancestral memory. Of course there's a lot more in the world, but I don't know anyone who even lives in their house that their grandparents lived in other than my own family, you know. So I think I'm quite lucky in that sense. And I think I mentioned earlier that this place has helped me remember who I am, and I'm hoping it'll do the same for my children and their children and their children. But the greedy part on my behalf was thinking that I could rush my way out of this debt and have my cake and eat it too. I was greedy for thinking that I could pay all this off and then sit down and live happily ever after like I wanted to. And the real lesson and value I think that I'd like to leave as my legacy is that I was willing to sacrifice some of my life and some of my dreams for something greater, which is my children and my family that comes after me. I'm sick of hearing about shit like, oh, we're spending our children's inheritance and all this fucking boomer logic or illogic. And it's really, really the opposite of anything that's good in the world. I grew up with a single mum, and she's always rented her whole life, never really owned anything. So for me, having my own place to die in, that was mine, has been of the utmost importance. So if I can die knowing that this place is mine, and that legally at least no one can take this from my children, I'm happy with that. If anyone wants to take it, at least we are in a position to legally fight for it, you know. And no one can take this place away from us. If I can keep my head down, swallow my pride a little bit, and just make sure that my children appreciate what I've done and what I'm willing to do. That's about all I can say. I could probably talk about this place again, like forever, like I said. I've got a lot more things I'd like to share at a later date, but not in this video. But I just wanted to really just talk about sacrifice and greed. And I'm just, on YouTube, I've seen a lot of talk and comments about coming from privilege in order to have a property where you can live a sustainable life, and how hard things are. And yeah, it's fucking hard, but it's worth it. And I knew that growing up, and I was prepared to do all that, and shit got a lot harder than I was prepared for. And the payoff of that is that it didn't kill me, and I'm harder for it. And like I said, if I could go back and do it all again with the wisdom that I've gathered along the way, I definitely would, but I wouldn't be as strong as I am today. What's the saying they say about hard men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times? I think that's relevant here. So I'm going to be living a pretty uncomfortable life, but hopefully I can break that cycle and keep my children hard and keep my children wise and live as long as possible. That's about it for now.